not only was it also great advocacy by the federal defenders, but this is another example of why why public defenders are incredible human beings because they get the hardest cases. They don't pick these cases. They don't ask for these
Hmm.
cases. So
Right.
once in a while, a case like this comes across, the file comes across your desk, and you have to stay on the post and represent a client who has done something really, really horrible. And you have to figure out a way through that, in a way that honors the oath that you took to as an officer of the court and to defend your client, and uphold the Constitution. Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing. Hey everybody, Doug Passon coming to you from Studio 3553 in Scottsdale, Arizona, back with my very, very good friend and wise colleague, Mark Allenbaugh of sentencingstats.com. Hello, Mark Allenbaugh. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hello, Doug.
How's
Welcome.
it
Thanks
going?
for having me. It's going
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Well, so I'm very excited because we have today one of our world famous sentencing post-mortem podcasts, wherein we dissect all the ins and outs of recent, very high-profile sentencings to see what went right and see what went wrong, if anything. Well, I guess it always goes wrong for someone. And today we have a twofer. And I don't know, I'll say this right up front. I don't know how long this is going to go. So it is possible that we're recording two podcasts today, one on the former head prosecutor in Baltimore City, Marilyn Mosby, who just got sentenced in a federal fraud case, and the other, our old friend, I guess you call him, David DePape. I say that because we did a podcast episode pre-sentencing about what his guidelines might be and talked about that case in detail. But now he has been sentenced, sort of. And so we're gonna go do the lowdown on David DePape too. And so we got two to do, and I don't know how much we're gonna do. So we're just gonna dig right in. I know where I'm can I know I've just been
Yeah.
talking a
Go.
lot
Go.
to set
Yeah.
this up, but I want to talk because there's a thread, a connective tissue, and I
Yeah.
just want to say this right off the bat. And I've talked about this before, and I've even done a little short TikToks and stuff like that. But what do these two cases both have in common, Mark Allenbaugh?
Public defenders.
Yes, federal public defenders. Each of these
I
cases,
get a
one
gold
is
star.
gold star, exactly. A lot of these, almost every sentencing post-mortem we've done in like Elizabeth Holmes and the Chrisleys, and they've all had these like $1 million,
Yes.
big firm army, high power army of lawyers. And this is not that. These
Mhm.
are the salt of the earth, federal public defenders, and I have an affinity for that because I was one for 12 years here in the District of Arizona. And I've said this time and time again. People want to call, just slap the label of public pretender on any public defender, but that is not a label that has any merit. Every case is different, but for the most part, these are some of the finest fucking
Yes.
lawyers, federal lawyers you could ever get your hands on, and I really think that both of these cases are going to be two examples of that. And
Yes.
it all leads back to tequila. So I do have to say, because, and by the way, we are recording this early. It's only 10:30 on my clock, so I'm not actually drinking tequila. But this is, and I've said this before, why lawyers are like tequila, because people think it's the fanciest bottle is going to be the best one, and that's not always true. But
Right.
I want to talk about this for a second. It's a great recommendation for anyone that's listening. What I have in my hand, if you can't see, is a brand called Tapatio 110. And look at this bottle. It's the most unassuming Like if you saw this bottle on the shelf, you might pass right over it. You might think it's like garbage. It's got a little screw top. I mean, come
Oh,
on.
wow.
This is, and I
Yeah.
am telling you, and this is a not an expensive bottle. This is probably in the $55 range bottle. This is one of the most phenomenal tequilas. I drink this all of the time. And it's rated like an 89 with a super high rating on Tequila Matchmaker. The price is right. The
Oh.
juice is amazing. And it's just plain little, simple, unassuming bottle. And to me, that's what the federal defenders are. They're head down, doing the work. They know their shit inside and out, plain unassuming. They may not be wearing the fanciest suit in the courtroom, but 9 times out of 10, they know more than every other person in the room.
What an excellent segue, just a excellent metaphor. I'm very impressed. Good, well done. Good
Well,
job.
thank you. Why, thank
That
you.
was excellent. Yes.
And of course, there are always exceptions to the rule. I mean, I've worked with some incredible, obviously big firm, very smart, talented lawyers. And there's a few bad apples in the bunch in the public defender's office, but I just need people to know, by and large, drop this public pretender bullshit. It's not fair and it's not right. It's just not accurate. So we're gonna find out why here in a hot minute. We are going to now discuss Mr. DePape, which we talked about it, and I don't exactly remember if we made predictions, but Mr. DePape was just sentenced, but there's a little bit of a rub, and he may be going back for another turn at sentencing. Do you want to talk about what's going on there, Mark Allenbaugh?
Well, yeah, I think I'm just looking at our original prediction, which according to, again, you're right. I can't recall if we did do a prediction, but I know we talked about the Jason output for him, and I had him at an offense level 43, which is I think what he did end up getting, and the average sentence for somebody like him was 350 to 403 months, even though life was recommended, and he got within that, close to that average, which was 360 months. So that's what he was sentenced to, which
Yeah.
still exceeds his life expectancy. So it's a de facto a life sentence. But what happened here, which I've never heard of before, is everybody forgot he has a right to allocute. Now, he doesn't have to, but the court still needs to ask,
Well, tell
hey,
us what is allocution for
so
people that don't
yeah,
know.
allocution is an ancient right that goes all the way back to England and before, apparently, even to the ancient Romans. That it basically you as the soon to be or now the condemned, you've been sentenced, not necessarily to death, but you do have a right of last words. What are you going to say? You have a right to say whatever you want to the court before it finally imposes sentence on you, whether it's death, as used to be the case very often, or nowadays is just some term of years in prison. And you can say pretty much, you could say whatever you want, but the court has to allow you that opportunity. Most defendants, if they say anything, it's very little, but very often, especially in trials, after you've been convicted at trial, mum's the word, and you don't
Yeah.
say anything. You waive your right to allocate because you're going to appeal, and you don't want to go up there and now all of a sudden admit guilt or say you're sorry and all that, because that will contradict your ability to appeal your conviction. If you were going to come up there and admit to it, then now any grounds that you had for an appeal or of the conviction have gone out the window. And Alan Ellis, a good friend of ours, has done a series of interviews of federal judges over the years, and he has always asked them, what they think of a right to allocute. And the judges, very often will say, they do appreciate hearing from the defendant, but it's very, very often what the defendant says doesn't really move the needle in the defendant's favor. It can only move, generally speaking, make it worse for the defendant, especially the longer they talk, because as humans, we have a tendency to try to minimize our bad conduct. And so defendants will get up there, even if they've pled guilty, they'll try to explain away their conduct. And that can, work badly for a defendant. But nonetheless,
Yeah.
it's still a right. And in a rare case, a defendant can say something to at least confirm for the judge if the judge was going to give a below guideline sentence or possibly a non-custodial sentence, what the defendant says and showing actual genuine contrition can help the judge confirm for him or herself about the non-custodial sentence they're about to give or about the below guideline sentence that they're about to give. It's not going to convince them to give that. They're already going to have that. But if you come in and show a lot of contrition, what judges say, it will say, okay, I'm doing the right thing. So it makes that decision easier. But so the point simply is allocution either can keep the status quo, and which is the best you can hope for.
Yeah.
But sometimes if you let your client talk too much, like I'm doing right now, it's going to make matters
Yes,
worse.
and that is generally true. But I will say that allocution is very important if you can allocute. But there's two things that you need to keep in mind. One is a lawyer needs to prepare a client very, very well, because the words that come out of their mouth, as you said, could do more harm than good. But the right words, it delivered with authenticity, I think, can make some difference. Maybe not all the difference. But the bigger point is words are words, and you would expect at the bare minimum, if you are accepting responsibility or you have pled guilty, that you would say you're sorry, or you have regret, or you have remorse, and those are just things that the judge hears all the time, and these words kind of become less meaningful if you haven't done anything else to show. In other words, all of our work is more about showing than telling. We always speak, blah, 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 especially lawyers. That's all we do. And lawyers and judges know that lawyers are paid to stand up and say nice things about the client or advocate for them. So what you're really hoping to accomplish is to have those words backed up by actions, whether it's trying to make restitution before sentencing, or just doing something in a way that shows that you really understand the wrongfulness of your actions, and that you are doing your best to make up for it, to make it right, to heal the wounds that you have caused, and to convey to the judge that that's not going to happen again, right? So these words are just a little bit of the tip of the iceberg, but if there's nothing else behind them, they're hollow, and it really can do a lot more harm than good.
Well, if I could recommend to your listeners and viewers an excellent article about the right to allocution written by a former federal judge. This is by Mark Bennett.
Yes.
And it was an article that appeared in March 2011 in the Champion, page 26 to be exact. And the title of the article is Heartstrings or Heartburn, a federal judge's musings on defendants' right, R-I-T-E, right, of allocution. An excellent article. Judge Bennett goes through a little bit of the history of the right of allocution, but more importantly, the do's and don'ts of allocution, what works and what doesn't, and I won't go into any more of it, but it's highly recommended, not only for counsel, but to give to a client. Like, read this before, if you want to allocute, you want to say, read this before you do it. And I would say this would be part of preparation.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'll try to put a link to that, or the article itself, in the show notes.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Mr. DePape. It occurs to me, for those folks who didn't listen to the original podcast or aren't following the news, they might not know who David DePape is. So this is the guy who sadly broke into the home of former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, and he attacked her husband, Paul Pelosi, with a hammer in the head and caused very, very serious injury to him. And Mr. DePape it came out, was a devout QAnon follower. He was down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. He was convinced that there's this cabal of pedophiles that are sex trafficking children, doing this, drinking their blood, all this stuff, and Donald Trump's the savior, and there's a big conspiracy to keep him out of office, and bleep, blop, bloop. And his plan was to break in, apparently for some reason, in a inflatable unicorn costume. I'm not exactly sure why he needed that, but it's not the hallmark of a rational mind. I
Because
think
he's
if
sui generis.
he is sui generis.
There it is, the
Um,
unicorn. Okay, but anyway,
he is.
sorry.
Oh yeah, the unicorn. Okay, so he's gonna, and the hammer is because his plan is to tie up former Speaker Pelosi,
Mm,
interrogate her to get the truth out of her about to expose
yeah,
this cabal, and if she was going to give lies to his interrogation, he was going to hit her in the knees or something with a hammer.
right.
And so his mitigation at sentencing, if you could call it that, was, well, I didn't mean to hurt Paul Pelosi. That was unexpected. I didn't break in with any intent to harm him. I was just needing to expose this conspiracy for the good of humanity and blah, blah, blah. And so that was kind of his, the attorney was saying, he actually has expressed remorse and acceptance of responsibility because he felt bad about harming Paul Pelosi, and that was never his plan. Of course, it didn't go very far. But I will say this: not only was it also great advocacy by the federal defenders, but this is another example of why why public defenders are incredible human beings, because they get the hardest cases. They don't pick these cases. They don't ask for these
Mhm,
cases. So
right.
once in a while, a case like this the file comes across your desk, and you have to stay on the post and represent a client who has done something really, really horrible. And you have to figure out a way through that, in a way that honors the oath that you took to as an officer of the court, and to defend your client, and uphold the Constitution. And so I'm super impressed with the federal defenders here for the representation that they gave this. It was a very, very difficult client. And you know what else I'm super impressed about? Well, you just talked about the fact that there was a recent so basically tell us more, because this is a unicorn in the sense that the judge forgot
You're right.
apparently to allow Mr. DePape to speak his piece and allocute at sentencing, and he has a right to do that. And so the judge, sua sponte almost, well, it wasn't sua
No, no,
sponte. I
no. It
think the
was
government
the government immediately.
I
Somebody woke
really
up.
wanted to use a Latin term, man.
Oh, sorry, sous spot.
It's only
Okay,
one. It's one of the only ones I
the
know.
government sous sponte.
I do know res ispa loquitur, the thing that
There you
speaks for
go.
itself. But what happened is the government saw the writing on the
Yes.
wall, like there's an issue for appeal here. He didn't
Yeah.
get a chance to allocute, so they filed a quick motion, and the
Right.
judge, without even allowing the defense to file a response, set it for resentencing, and that is happening. It probably will have happened by the time this podcast
Yeah,
airs,
it's happening
right?
next Tuesday. Correct. Yeah. Well, it's happening next. Yeah, the resentencing is happening next Tuesday. Which, by the way, just before I get to the allocution and something interesting about this. So the PSR, I was one level off. I thought that he would get the terrorism enhancement, and
Yeah.
so he would have easily made it to offense level 43. The probation office did not give him the terrorism enhancement, or did not recommend it. So he was
The
only at
government asked for it,
the
though. The
government asked
government
for it.
advocated
We'll get
for
to
it.
that for a second.
Yeah.
So the probation office calculated his total offense level to only be 42, which is 360 months to life. And probation actually recommended a slight variance below that to 300 months, which the government opposed, and obviously which the court did not follow here, assuming the court adopted the probation office's calculation and only giving 360 months. But I should say, it's well
Yeah.
beyond DePape's life expectancy. But at any rate, the government did ask for the terrorism enhancement. But it appears to me, there's the trial or the sentencing transcript isn't available to the public yet, but it appears to be that the court did not impose the terrorism enhancement here in giving the 360-month sentence. So what's
Yeah.
really interesting about this is this unicorn, this sui generis case gives us it's like an experiment to see what damage, if any, can an allocution do.
Hmm.
Because the judge could have given a higher sentence and the government was asking for 50 years.
Yeah.
Now, because we're going back to court again, because the judge forgot to ask him if he wanted to allocute. So what's interesting to me is why the defense counsel didn't raise this. And why I think they didn't is because they don't want him to.
Yeah.
They don't want him to
There's
allocute.
nothing
They don't
he
want him
could
to say a
say that.
damn
Yeah.
thing. So why not? So when this was noticed, when the government, because the government, same day, right after sentencing, the government, oh my God, we didn't, the judge forgot to ask him to allocute. And what they said in their motion is they immediately called defense counsel and wanted to hear back from them. But instead of calling back or saying anything, the defense counsel immediately filed a notice of appeal. Now, I don't know if this was in bad faith or good faith. It doesn't matter what the faith was. The government, and I think the court, took that immediate notice of trying to filing the notice of appeal. They interpreted that act as trying to take away the court's jurisdiction. They were like, okay, good, we dodged a bullet here. Let's get this so the court doesn't have jurisdiction, so we're done. So this guy can never talk.
Yeah.
But as the government correctly pointed out, and as the court well knows that bringing this under Rule 35 to fix an error in sentencing procedure, which this was, does not divest the trial court of jurisdiction even after the notice of appeal has been filed. And this is just for the appellate nerds out there. So this is why, even though a notice of appeal has been filed, the court still has jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And the court wisely noted that even if the court doesn't have jurisdiction, it's going to do this under a Rule 37, which allows a court to make an indicative ruling if the appellate court was to remand. So, she may make an indicative ruling that say that if the court's to remand, I would have imposed a sentence of 20 years or something like that. And then that would be great if the court. But here, I think it's going to go very badly. So reading the tea leaves here again, I think that defense counsel doesn't want him to allocute, and he wants to allocute. Otherwise, I think it would have been very easy to resolve this issue and just, file a motion or a notice with the court that, even though you didn't ask, we waive it. We waive it. So no harm, no foul, no issue, and we're on to the appeal.
Yeah.
But I think this guy really wants to talk. And
you might be right. You might be right in that, and that's because of the mental health stuff going on. But here's the other interesting thing, which is the defense lawyer, and this is another thing I love about, they're kind of scrappy in this. They filed a motion to oppose bringing him back for this resentencing.
Right.
And not only did the lawyer come in hot to basically go at the judge, because a lot of lawyers, especially in federal court, are a little timid about kind of really getting scrappy with the judge because, it's a small community. I got to be before this judge again. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to bleep, blop, bloop. No, you rock the boat when it's warranted. But, she comes in hot, this lawyer, and starts out over the defense vigorous and repeated objections the government urged, and the court agreed to sentence David DePape in his federal case in the midst of his ongoing state criminal trial. Blah blah blah. Now they want to now the court is taking the extraordinary step of hauling Mr. DePape back into federal court to, quote, reopen his sentencing hearing. In less than 24 hours after the government filed this motion and without affording Mr. Pape an opportunity to respond, the court granted the government's motion and ordered Mr. DePape return to court during his trial in state court. So it's basically like, what the fuck are you doing, man? This is not right. And I like it. But here's what I like even more. What else did they say? If you're going to do this, we want a different judge.
Right.
Which is very spunky and scrappy, and I love it because there's been a lot of times where we've thought, man, we should try to recuse a judge. They're just never going to be fair, and most lawyers.
Well, so they do have and it just occurred to me is usually like in a resentencing, you don't get a new judge. Even if you want a new judge, you don't get a new judge. It goes back to that same judge because the bar is really high to try to show, like we're learning about down in some case down in the Southern District of Florida with some former game show host. Federal judges, it's hard to get either get them to recuse
Yeah,
or to get an appellate court to order a
right.
recusal. So here I mean, I was wondering why would they even raise that? Because you normally don't get that anyway with a resentencing. And here's what I think, though, what they're signaling, the way they review this, the reason why they use the term reopen, I think,
Hmm.
is they're not reviewing this as we're just going to go in and tinker with a sentence. They're seeing this as an entirely redo
Yeah,
of the entire sentence.
yeah, yeah.
And that's what they're trying to avoid because they know that if they come in and redo it and he allocutes, the judge is going to say, well, shit, now that I've heard this, you're getting the 50 years.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
that's why
And
they're,
there
and
and they
so
there
and
is
they have a
some
good
law.
point. They have a good point.
They do, and they cited some law in this
Yeah.
that says, and the lawyer wrote in that pleading, here the court has already forcefully expressed strong views about Mr.
Right.
DePape, stating that he had, quote, taunted America,
Mhm.
comparing him to the infamous assassins of President Lincoln and Kennedy, and describing Mr. Pape's actions as
Yeah.
unprecedented. So there, this is pretty hats off. I mean, and it's not going to work, I don't think, but maybe it'll be another issue for appeal. But I love
Right.
the fact that they made
It's
the
another
ask.
issue for appeal. Yeah,
I love it. But
I love it
here,
too because it's an interesting, whether is this a full resentencing or not that's
yeah.
going to happen. And, if it is if it's a de novo, here's the Latin again. If it's a de novo sentencing or resentencing, you know, why would you want a new judge? Well, because the current judge has already expressed these strong views, is now biased essentially. So
Yes.
if I want a clean slate, if I'm entitled, if my first sentencing, I guess I'm speaking, I'm trying to write the appellate brief in my head. So
Yes.
if I want a new judge, or if I want a different judge now, and this is a resentencing, this really isn't that's the way I would put it. This is not a resentencing. This is a do-over of my initial sentencing, but now my judge is already biased
Yeah.
because I get to do this. This isn't to try to fix a tiny little technical error. No, I get the whole kit and caboodle new,
Hmm.
and I already got
Yeah.
a biased judge, so you can't do this now. And of course, she's going to do it. The original judge is going to stay, and now this is a great issue for appeal. Now this is
Yeah, I mean,
fantastic,
well,
and
it's interesting, but if you
yeah,
take the new judge out of the equation, I sort
yeah.
of wonder if this is a Pyrrhic victory in the sense that, like, what is the remedy? If it's just the issue of he didn't get a right to allocute, and the defense lawyer is saying too late, too bad, so sad, he can't go back, and then
Well,
you appeal that,
yeah.
isn't the remedy to go back for resentencing and allocute? So it's just
No, see,
no.
this is what I no. I think here this is so unusual. Now, the more I think about it,
Okay.
the only remedy, is a new judge because this is not a resentencing. This is a do-over of the first sentencing. To your point, you can't unring the bell. You already have. This is a do-over of the first sentencing of in front of the same judge who has already made up her mind
Yeah.
and is already biased and has already made findings and cannot do it truly de novo. Cannot come back in a clean slate
Yeah.
because she can't unring the bell of all the stuff
Right.
that she's already found. And
Interesting. What else? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
the only remedy on appeal is a full de novo resentencing in front of a new unbiased judge
Yeah.
that
And
can now hear his allocution and maybe a higher, maybe lower, or whatever it is.
yeah.
This is a hell of an issue. The more I'm talking, the more I like it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and the other thing about the bias, what I haven't seen the sentencing transcript yet,
yeah.
but there's some references to the sentencing, and the defense lawyer said in there not only the Lincoln and Kennedy assassination thing, but they said the court made comments at sentencing that it viewed itself as potentially at risk of attack by someone like Mr. DePape. And
Ooh,
the judge said, I'm willing to take that risk myself and put myself at risk to serve the public.
ooh, geez,
So
ouch. Ooh, that's not
yeah,
good.
right.
No, that's
And so
bad.
So we have all these things that say, okay, she's clearly got her bent about Mr. DePape, but here's the other thing.
She's injecting herself into it personally.
She is,
Yeah.
and she's put herself in sort of in the shoes of the victim or the intended victim,
Yeah.
Speaker Pelosi, to say, okay, this is yeah, and guess what? This is bad what he did. Nobody's saying it's
Yeah.
not bad,
Right.
but guess what? What appears to have also happened here, which in my mind speaks perhaps the loudest to her bias, is there was a very powerful mitigation story told that about surrounding mental health
Yes.
that seems to be with a 30-year sentence on its face suggests very strongly that that whole thing is washed away, discounted, brushed aside.
Well, in
Because
fairness, I think I might disagree with that a little bit, just in the sense that she did not give him the terrorism enhancement, despite all that other hyperbole that she was saying. And I think, though, that you're right. I think that his mental health issues did play a role in why she didn't give him the terrorism enhancement, because
well,
he's,
I mean, you would have argued, we were putting mental health aside, you would have argued, you would have had a strong argument that this is not the appropriate, it's not appropriate for terrorism because he's really concerned with rooting out pedophiles and everything else. This isn't about affecting the government or using terror to impact, political. I mean, he could have just as easily have done this to Tom Hanks, who was also on his list of the
mhm,
pedophile cabal. So,
right,
I mean, if I'm the defense lawyer and they did
right,
argue
mm,
this, this
yeah,
isn't the same kind of thing as like
right,
January 6th or whatever, where
right,
they're
right, right,
really
right,
targeting this person because of her
right.
role in government.
Well,
Um,
right, and that was a convincing argument, obviously, because the
So I don't know if it had
probation
anything to
didn't
do.
give it to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it had anything to do with mental health. I also, it
Okay.
could have been that the judge had enough of the guideline, enough to go on. We've seen this over and over where they
Well, the
don't
reason why I
actually,
say, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but
yeah.
remember the terrorism enhancement has a motivation element to it.
Yeah.
So the motivation has to be political. So that's why I come back to his fantasy world about the cabal of pedophiles. That wasn't a governmental organization,
Yeah.
even though some claim it is.
Yeah. Well, I'm just
But
gently pushing back on the idea that mental health was the motivation for her not giving the terrorism.
yeah, okay.
But I would like to see the full sentencing transcript. But
Yes.
here's what we have to talk about now. And I really didn't think we were going to have to talk about it in the context of David DePape. And it's autism.
Yes.
It's autism. And I, I re-listened to our podcast. We both look. It didn't take like a mental health guru. We didn't have to have our advanced degree in psychology or psychiatry to know that this guy had a screw loose when he's gonna go in there with a unicorn costume and hammer Nancy Pelosi in the knees because of a pedophile cabal. Like that's just fucking kooky. And so we all sort of saw that the handwriting on the wall that this was a mental health case, and it was probably very difficult for the defense lawyer because a lot of times when someone has serious mental health problems, they don't know that they do, and they don't want the lawyer saying that they do. So were they hamstrung there? But as we read the sentencing memo in this case, the lawyer very clearly spelled out that there were mental health issues
Mhm.
and there was autism.
Yeah, and there's
And
also something that he was diagnosed with pervasive social deficit consistent with, and it's
yeah,
redacted. So I'm wondering what that might be.
right. So I've got the thing in front of me, but it just doesn't take a genius to know what they're talking about here.
Yeah,
They redacted the specific diagnosis. It says he has now been diagnosed with redacted,
yeah,
two
yeah,
things at least, because it says
yeah.
both of which he unknowingly was likely dealing with for most of his young life.
Well,
So
they use the term neurodiversity throughout,
yes,
and
and then
autistic spectrum, and
yeah, they didn't redact everything because
yeah, they missed it.
it's
Yeah,
he's been uncomfortable in social situations,
yeah,
struggled with social situations, experienced difficulties developing relationships. These limitations, as well as displays of appropriate affect, are indicative of a pervasive social deficit consistent with blacked out, duh. And
Yeah.
his discomfort with social interactions is also a characteristic of blacked out, as is cognitive or perceptual distortions and eccentricities of behaviors, as well as odd beliefs or magical thinking.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, it's there that the Chuang Declaration, Exhibit B, this is at the
uh-huh,
bottom of page 7 that they quote from. Well, actually, it's a letter of support. Excuse me. It's from Peter Luft.
yeah.
And we wondered if David's criminal action was at least partly the result of childhood trauma, his likely being on the autistic spectrum,
Hmm.
and his then solitary private life spent almost entirely on right-wing social media.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so here we go with the naysayers going, oh, great, another defendant using the excuse du jour of autism. And so
an
I,
excuse.
I want to put a fine point on this. First of all, I hate that autism is involved in this case because, you know, autistic people are not dangerous, violent. They don't lack empathy. They're loving, caring, incredibly intelligent, amazing human beings. It just so happens that autism spectrum disorder can be a superpower and kryptonite all rolled into one. And so this is a case where, most people on the spectrum are not going to run afoul of the law in any way, shape, or form because they're rule followers, and certainly not doing violent, intentionally violent acts like this. And so I worry that once you inject autism in there, that those in the autistic community are going to be horrified because they know that's not them and that doesn't represent them. But what I see happening here, and I've seen it in other cases too, is it's really a case of autism plus. In other words, you have autism, but if you've had the right interventions, the right tools, and you don't have these other factors fucking you up. So a history of being sexually traumatized,
Mhm.
perhaps not in this case, but I'm just saying, or there's another mental health diagnosis here that's blacked out. I don't know if it's bipolar, schizophrenia, delusional disorder, but there's some other mental health thing happening there. So autism is one factor, but it would explain a bunch of things. One would be how someone gets down the rabbit hole of conspiracies, because I see this in autism cases, especially in these cases where people get radicalized. I'd like
Yeah.
to reach out to Nancy Pelosi's daughter, who does the documentaries. I'm forgetting her name. Sorry, because
Yeah.
I'm sure she's listening. But she did this thing about the insurrectionists next door. That was her last documentary about who are these people that got so radicalized that went down the 1-6 rabbit hole. And it was very obvious from some of the people that she was profiling that they were so fucking clearly on the spectrum. And now we have the person who painfully, horribly, attacked, and he's on the spectrum. So what does that mean? It means, you know, these are folks who they obsess, they perseverate, they get fixated and focused on one topic, but whether it's model airplanes or World War II history or trains, or in this case, it's fucking QAnon.
Mhm.
And they get completely obsessed and go and just dig and dig and dig and deep. And what do? They live their whole lives online because of these social deficits. Mr. DePape is spending far too much time online, being exposed to the garbage and trash and nonsense there, and
Right.
going further and further down the rabbit hole.
Right.
And so it does give some. It's not an excuse, it's context. It does give some context about how people are vulnerable to this crazy conspiracy thinking and radicalization. And I guarantee you, I want to do I've done podcasts on autism, but I've never done one specifically on autism and radicalization because
Mm.
Mr. Pape has been radicalized. But I guarantee you that the experts would say that there is a link between autism and vulnerability to
Yeah.
these crazy beliefs and
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah.
And this is mitigation in the truest sense. And I don't know if the judge gave it a fucking minute of attention. The other thing it does, and she eloquently explains this in her memo, but it talks about their affect. Folks on the spectrum often don't express a lot of emotion. and it
Mhm.
can be misinterpreted as lack of remorse or they're cold, lack of empathy monsters. No, they just have a real hard time reading social cues and expressing social cues. And a judge needed to know that. The jury probably needed to know it too. And I don't know if that was ever presented at trial, but it means that he's not a monster. He's a human being whose brain, is with cognitive deficits that underlie his conduct.
Yeah.
And if that's not mitigation, I don't know what is. And there's, of course, in the old sentencing guideline regime, a downward departure built right in there for diminished capacity if it's related
Yeah.
to
It's still
traumatic
there.
event.
It's still there.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's mitigation in a massive way. And I don't think the judge took it into account in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
And you could say, well, maybe she gave him a mitigated sense, but I don't think 30, I don't know in what world 30 years for an assault. I mean, I had people who have brutally murdered people who have
Well, he
gotten
almost
less
killed.
than
I mean, he did almost kill Paul Pelosi. It was pretty violent.
it was. But
Yeah.
I'm saying that 30 years for an assault, and thank God he lived, and hopefully he'll be okay going forward. But I think 30 years for an assault, especially with this kind of well-documented mitigation, is to me gratuitous. It's not a
You're right.
life
No, yeah,
sentence.
I agree with you there. Yes. Yeah. I think
Not a
30
life
years
sentence.
was too well. I mean, let's really call it what it is. It's not 30 years. It's a life
It's a
sentence.
life sentence.
Yeah.
And
So,
they
or
didn't, I
death
don't
by
think.
prison.
Yeah, absolutely. And they argued that they wanted concurrent sentences with the state case that's come. I guess he's starting his trial maybe next week too, but
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't know if she did that. I'm not sure if you know about
I
that,
don't
but
know.
that would be nice because
Mm.
it's definitely a life sentence. And I don't think they argued life expectancy, and so I would have liked to have seen that.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
also
they
don't.
argued for 14 years, which interestingly enough, just about matches my life expectancy prediction for him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it would have mattered because you to say,
Yeah.
Judge, you're giving him a life sentence. Like, I'm not sure the
Yeah.
judge cares.
Yeah.
I'm sure she's
Yes, you're right.
probably actually okay with that. But the other thing I would have liked to have seen that I didn't see in case I missed it is, okay, he's diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Why haven't we told the story about what prison's like for him?
Right.
With a certain a good prison expert like a
Right.
Maureen Baird
Like
and a
Maureen.
Jan
Exactly.
Purdue or whatever to
Yeah.
say, yeah, not only did you give him 30, but let's talk about what that 30 is going to look like for him every single day being on the autism spectrum.
Right. Right.
So, but on the whole, hats off, another amazing performance by the defender, and they're still
Yeah.
fighting. They're still fighting. And so it'll be interesting. I'm really, really interested to see, I think this podcast drops on the day that he goes back to court. And I really will be interested to see what happens. We may have to do a third, that would be unprecedented. We
Yes.
may have to do a third, a sentencing post
Well,
mortem to
it's
make
self
America great again, again.
right. Right. Selfishly, the scientist in me, if you will, does hope he allocutes and that he is given a different sentence, whether above or below, because now we have kind of a baseline, what kind of sentence he received without allocution and what kind of sentence he received with allocution.
Yeah.
And to see what difference that made, because like I was saying before, what's so fascinating to me, at least, I mean, not only is this an interesting case and everything, but the fact that for the first time that I'm aware of, you will actually be able to tell what difference an allocution actually makes,
Yeah.
rather than kind of speculating. I had to do something with this or didn't. Blah 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 blah. We can actually see this is an empirical test of the effect of allocution in the case, and that's what I'm really hoping to see. But I
Yeah.
think I really do hope, though, that he doesn't say anything. I hope they just go in there and wave it and be on their way.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but
don't think there's a thing he can say. And the question is, does he want to because it's his right? And if he wants to, can the lawyer talk him out of it because it's clearly not in his best interest, especially with a pending state
yeah,
trial? He can't, I mean, anything he's. So my guess is he doesn't say anything and it's the same sentence. If he
yeah,
does say something, my guess is same sentence. And if he doesn't say anything, it's just the same sentence. I think she's given the sentence she's going to give, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We will see.
Yes.
All I can say is this crazy QAnon crap is terrifying. And
Yes.
I mean, it's terrifying. And the defense cited something in their memo that I had to just quote, which is, quote, polls suggest that around 30 million American adults
Oh, yeah.
believe that there is a deep state of pedophile
That's
vampires.
Jesus.
Pedophile vampires, you know, this whole drinking the adrenochrome, the baby's blood, who stole the election from Trump. This is what we're up against moving forward as a country, and it's deeply, deeply terrifying. And Paul Pelosi is the poster child for this insanity. I mean, this is what happens when collectively we all lose our fucking minds.
January 6th. That's
yeah. So that's a happy note to leave it on. But I will say this.
Happy Memorial Day.
Let me just bring it all home by letting you know that I've internalized the Latin lesson and say, you, Mark Allenbaugh, are sui generis. You are truly one of a kind. You're an absolutely unique human being. You bring an unparalleled skill set to the world of sentencing, federal sentencing especially, and I'm deeply grateful to have to call you friend and colleague. So thank you for being here and for breaking this all down for us.
Oh, thank you, Doug. I feel like, I should toast you with some really expensive tequila now. I feel
not
very
expensive.
blessed by that.
What have you learned? The price doesn't matter.
Sorry,
this
Sensei.
Is a beautiful $55 bottle of exquisite Tapatio 110. So, and that's cheap in the world of tequila. So it's not about the money, baby. It ain't about the money. It's about the quality, and you are quality through and through. But anyway, you'll get there. You'll figure this tequila thing out eventually. I have full faith and confidence in you.
Good.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.